So we will move on to the next session, which is the RBCDSAI Student Spotlight Talks. The first talk is multi-headed spatial dynamic memory GANs for text image synthesis by Amrit, Diggavi, Seshadri. So Amrit, can you please share your screen? Please note that the talk is for 12 minutes. So please try to wind up the talk by 12 minutes. Over to you, Amrit.
Hi. Sorry, my connection dropped for a second. Can I start?
Yes, please go ahead. You have 12 minutes.
So, hi everyone. My name is Amrit Seshadri. I'm a post-baccalaureate fellow at RBCDSAI, working under the guidance of Professor Balaraman Ravindran. And today I'm going to be talking about a novel text-to-image generator architecture that we've proposed called multi-headed spatial dynamic memory generative adversarial networks, or MSDM GAN for short. So I'll start by briefly describing the task of text-to-image generation, and then I'll describe the motivation and design of three novel components of our model. I'll present a comparison between ablative versions of our model, and finally I'll make a comparison against the previous state of art for the task. So here's an example of what we're typically trying to achieve in text-to-image generation. We have a given text description to start with, and we want to try and generate a realistic looking synthetic image that matches the given text description. We also usually feed our network a vector of random noise to try and guide the selection of text relevant image attributes in our synthetic images. So this is the first architecture that was proposed to solve this task of text-to-image generation, proposed by Reed et al. In 2016. And what they do is they encode a given text description using a pre-trained text encoder, and they concatenate the sentence vector with a vector of random noise before feeding it into the generator network. In the case of the discriminator network, they concatenate the same sentence information with a downsampled image vector so that it can be used by the discriminator to predict the probability of an image being a real or a fake. And these two networks are trained in an adversarial fashion. So the idea is that as the discriminator learns to distinguish between real and fake images based on the given text description, the generator learns to generate realistic images that match the given text description in order to convincingly fool the discriminator network. And these are some examples of images generated by this model for different selections of random noise. So here, this flower, given a text description, the flower has petals that are bright pinkish purple and white stigma. You get some sort of matching images. And for a description like the small bird has a pink breast and crown and black primaries and secondaries, again, you get some sort of matching images. Now, since this first architecture was proposed in 2016, there's been a surge of interest in training conditional GAN models for this task of text-to-image generation. And current methods synthesize images from text, not in this one step, but in a multi-stage manner. So they do this by typically first generating a rough initial image from a global sentence level vector, and then refining image details with word level information from the text at subsequent stages. And they use separate discriminator networks to provide feedback on image realism at each stage of the generation. So however, existing methods that follow this multi-stage paradigm sort of suffer three important limitations. The first problem is that the current methods attempt to generate initial image features directly from a sentence level vector. And in doing so, the initial generation stage fails to cleanly separate out image attributes at a word level. So if potentially distinct objects like a cat or a tree, for example, are entangled in the sentence level representation, then the presence of either word in a sentence could prompt the initial stage to generate the same sort of hybrid image attributes. And this is important because the subsequent refinement stages rely upon the initial image features to provide a meaningful basis for the word level image improvement. And by feeding them ambiguous or poorly formed initial features, we limit the scope of their refinement. So to solve this problem, we introduce a novel initial generation stage that generates a separate set of image features for each word n-gram in the given input text description. And we iteratively fuse these disentangled sets of image features together to obtain our final set of image features for the initial stage. The next problem with current methods is that they fail to construct region-specific representations of text at refinement stages. Whereas in complex sort of real-world scenes, this requirement for region-contextualized interpretation of words is quite commonplace. So based on the region under consideration, the same word may dictate a fundamentally different type of refinement within the same image. So for example, if you take the word raining, it dictates a requirement in the region of the sky that's fundamentally different from the requirement it dictates in the region of the ground. While the sky is supposed to become more cloudy, the ground is supposed to become wet. And in order to generate realistic images from text descriptions, we feel it's important that we construct an architecture that allows different image regions to sort of assimilate a region contextualized information from text descriptions. So what we do is in our model, we introduce a spatial dynamic memory module that fuses word information in a custom way with each region of the initial image. And doing this, we obtain region contextualized representations of text. And at each refinement stage, we retrieve our features for image improvement from this spatial dynamic memory module. Finally, we note that current methods generate refinement features, which are what modify the previous initial image, only once at each refinement stage and attempt to address all image aspects within a single shot. And doing this sort of single shot image modification limits the finesse or the precision with which we can learn image improvement at each refinement stage. So to address this third issue, we introduce an iterative mechanism of multi-headed image refinement, wherein we explicitly allow each stage of refinement to make multiple distinct modifications to the initial image and train this end-to-end sort of under common discriminator feedback. So coming to the results, use the Frechet inception distance to evaluate image quality, the art discipline score to evaluate the similarity of synthetic images to their corresponding text descriptions. So quantitative results that you can see in this table here demonstrate that our disentangled initial generation stage is able to improve image quality for both the CUB and the COCO data sets while maintaining a competitive similarity with generating text. And so here, IG refers to the sort of typical initial generation stage, which attempts to generate images directly from a sentence vector. Dig refers to our disentangled initial generation stage. And I have results here shown for different sizes of word n-grams. So when I say KS is equal to 1, we've generated separate sets of image features for each word and then fused them together. KS is equal to 2, we've generated separate disentangled sets for each word by gram and fused them together. And KS is equal to 3, we've generated separate sets for each word trigram and fused them together. And we find best results by generating separate sets of image features for word trigrams. So the figure here shows a qualitative comparison between 64 by 64 synthetic images generated by our dig stage for word trigrams and the previous conventional initial generation stage employed by previous methods, and for the same text descriptions. And what we observe is that our disentangled initial generation stage typically leads to images that are better formed with objects that are more clearly separated and more clearly discernible. So next we have a qualitative comparison between synthetic images generated by the DM-GAN model, which is a previous method, the previous state of the art. A model that uses our disentangled initial generation along with DM-GAN's refinement stages to highlight the efficacy of our disentangled initial stage. Then we have a model which uses our disentangled initial stage along with our spatial dynamic memory module to highlight the efficacy of using these region contextualized representations of text. And finally, we've got a model which uses our disentangled initial generation stage, our spatial dynamic memory modules, and our multi-headed mechanism to make multiple modifications to the image at each refinement stage. And this constitutes our full MSDM-GAN model. So all variants of our model are trained for 700 epochs on the CUB dataset. And we observe that each component of our model typically improves the visual quality of images generated. In particular, we notice that using multiple refinement heads makes us generate text-relevant image data that's of a significantly better quality than what we see if we do sort of a single-shot image modification. And as seen in the table, we also observe a quantitative improvement in image realism and text-to-image similarity for the addition of each component of our MSDM GAN model. So finally, here we have a comparison between our model and the previous state of the art. Qualitatively, we observed that synthetic images generated by our model are typically sharper and more distinct than those generated by prior methods. Here I'm showing DM-GAN, which is the previous state of the art, and attention GAN, which is sort of outperformed by DM-GAN. And in particular, we observed that our method generates image attributes that possess greater detail and that are a better match for the generating text. In addition to this qualitative improvement, we also achieved quantitative improvement in image realism over prior methods, decreasing the lowest reported Freshy inception distance by 21.58% on the CUP dataset and by 4.21% in the COCO dataset. We report higher art precision scores as well, showing a greater text-to-image similarity for our synthetic images. And we do report slightly lower inception scores than prior methods, but we note that the Freshy inception distance that we use for image realism has been shown to be more consistent with human judgment of image realism than the inception score. And yes, this brings me to the end of my presentation. And if, there should be time, I suppose, for any questions, if there are any.
So thanks, Amrit, for the talk. So do we have any questions from the panelists? So yeah, if there are no questions from the panelists, then yeah, there is one couple of audience, attendee questions. So the first question is, where do we need to synthesize an image from text? So point us to some applications.
So typically, you would think of this in the context of computer-aided design. So although there have not been too many sort of applications, I can sort of give you an internet resource to. One of the applications that I might think of is something like a description from which you would want to synthesize a blueprint or sort of a 3D model or things like that. Basically, any kind of computer-aided design where you'd want to try and convert text into image data, you might try and apply this.
Okay. Thanks, Amrit. So there is also some other question. It would be nice if you can actually key in the answers in the Q&A box.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
So yeah. So with that, I think we would move on to the next presentation on. So the title is Sequence Neighborhoods Enable Reliable Prediction of Pathogenic Mutations in Cancer Genomes. This is by Shayantan Banerjee. So,
hello, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Can you please share your screen?
Sure, sir.
Yeah. So, yeah, you would have 12 minutes of time.
Sure, sir.
Over to you. Thanks.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shayantan, and I'm a master's student jointly supervised by Dr. Karthik Raman and Dr. Balanaman Ravinder. So I'll be presenting my master's thesis, which is titled Sequence Neighborhoods Enable Reliable Prediction of Pathogenic Mutations in Cancer Genomes. So just to give you a background on my work, cancer is caused due to the accumulation of somatic mutations during the lifetime of an individual. So these mutations are gained in a sequential manner and can be due to both intrinsic mutational processes and environmental exposures. Broadly, these mutations can be classified into two classes, also known as drivers. Drivers are the mutations that contribute to the overall cancer progression, and passengers are the silent mutations. So our overall goal was to study the sequence composition of the driver and passenger mutations and develop robust machine learning models to distinguish between the two classes. So coming to the hypothesis part, what we are really interested is the following. Given a set of mutations from cancer sequencing studies represented by the bold red nucleotides here, can we extract an arbitrary number of neighborhood sequences upstream and downstream from the mutated position and check if there is a difference in the underlying probability distributions between the two classes? So for instance, these two peaks represent the driver and passenger distributions or distributions drawn from the neighborhood. Now at a particular significance threshold, can we say that these two are really different? Secondly, given this newfound statistically significant dissimilarity, can we build a robust machine learning models to distinguish between the two classes? So basically, we were looking for a signal, and given we find a signal, we were interested in building machine learning models to further build generalizable tools such that people can actually input their preferred set of mutations and get predictions on the same. So given the coming to the feature representation, the features were extracted in the following manner. Given a mutated position, which is represented by this triplet, chromosome position and change, we would extract X number of nucleotides to the left and right. So for purposes of this talk, I've chosen X equal to 4. So now for the first form of representation, we use what is popularly known as the one-hot encoding scheme. So here, each neighboring nucleotide was represented as a binary vector of size 4, containing all 0 values except the index of that nucleotide, which was marked as 1. Thus, the A nucleotide was encoded as 1000, G as 0010, and so on. So this basically inflated our feature space. For a particular neighborhood size of 10, we will have 4 into 10 this side and 4 into 10 this side, a total of 80 features. Plus, we also considered the feature that is the chromosome number and the mutation change type, so a total of 82 features. So the next form of feature representation is through the overlapping k-mer sizes of 2, 3, and 4. Which is given this particular sequence and given a k-mer size of 2, it will be AA, AT, and TC, overlapping k-mer sizes of 2, and similarly AAT, ATC for 3 and 4. The final feature matrix for the overlapping k-mers is an m by n matrix, and the values in these matrices would be derived using two popularly used for vectorization techniques, the count vectorizer and the TF-IDF vectorizer. Given this matrix, where m is the number of mutations or the neighborhood profiles, and n is the vocabulary size or the number of unique k-mers of a given size, we would build our machine learning models. So this is the overall workflow that we adopted for our model. So we started off with missense mutations containing labeled positive or driver mutations and negative or passenger mutations, and extracted the raw nucleotide sequences from the reference genome. So again, for purposes of this talk, I've chosen n equal to 5 here. Next, we map the sequences to a numerical format using two commonly used vectorization schemes that I mentioned, the count and the TF-ID vectorizer. This was followed by estimating the underlying densities or the distributional difference between the two neighborhoods using a popular generative modeling technique known as the kernel density estimation. So our estimated density showed that there is a significant difference between the underlying driver and passenger neighborhood distribution. And that sort of inspired us to proceed with the machine learning analysis. Here, we first identified a test set that consisted of missense mutations from a well-known benchmarking study for validation purpose. And then we integrated our neighborhood sequencing data with other genomic features, conservation features, and amino acid features. Uh, we Then we integrated our neighborhood sequencing. After integrating this data with other features, we removed the overlapping mutations between the training and the test set. So basically, this would be our final set of mutations that we trained our data on, and we built a model which we call as NB driver or neighborhood driver. So we tested the generalizability of NB driver on 4 separate independent validation data sets with minimal overlap from large-scale cancer mutation data sets. Our results were comparable with some of the frequently used top mutation effect predictors. Moreover, the ensemble models that we built by integrating the predictions with NB driver and other top predictors outperformed every single predictor and had an overall accuracy of 95% on an independent test set. So some of the key results from an analysis discussed here. So we observed that for except for one window size, and that is the window size of 1, we saw a significant difference in the class-wise neighborhood distributions, and this was the signal that we were looking for. Second, through our internal validation results, we achieved an overall average AUC of 0.832 and an MCC of 0.584. And while testing the predictive part of our model, our NB driver, on an independent validation set consisting of literature curated mutations, we got an overall accuracy of 0.889. So our model was also efficient at predicting unseen pathogenic coding point mutations from 5 independent validation datasets. And NB driver could also predict rare driver mutations from a particularly aggressive form of cancer called glioblastoma multiforme, which affects the brain and the spine, with an accuracy of 85%. NB driver also identified 130 driver genes that had overlap with large-scale driver gene discovery studies from well-known cancer databases. So our overall study suggests that there exists a difference in the neighborhood composition within driver and passenger mutations, and that sequence neighborhoods do enable reliable prediction of pathogenic mutations from cancer genes. So that brings me to the end of the talk. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Okay. So do we have any question from the panelists? So I think, yeah, so there are no questions from the panelists. So yeah, thanks, Shayantan, for the talk. So we will now move on to the next talk, reinforcement learning for unified allocation and patterning in signaling games with uncertainty by Aravind Venugopal. So Aravind, you will have 12 minutes.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Just setting up and starting.
Aravind, please take over whenever you're ready.
Hi everyone. Am I audible? And shall I start?
Yes, yes, you're audible.
Yeah,
Please
sorry
start.
for the initial delay. Few connectivity problems. So good evening everyone. My name is Aravind Venugopal, and I'm currently working as a post-bac fellow at RBCDSAI under the guidance of Professor Balaraman Ravindran. And today I'm going to talk about our work on reinforcement learning for unified allocation and patrolling in signaling games with uncertainty, presented at AMAS 2021. This work is a collaboration between RBCDSAI and Harvard University with Elizabeth Bondi, Harshodhan Kamarthi, Keval Dulakia, and under the guidance of Professor Balaraman Ravindran and Professor Milan Tambe. So our work is motivated by the green security domain and green security problems, such as wildlife poaching, illegal logging, and illegal fishing. These issues have destructive impacts on ecosystems and the communities that depend on them. So a lot of governments as well as non-governmental agencies have employed the services of law enforcement agencies to perform patrolling and resource allocation in these green security domains. But the problem is that in most cases, the size of the area to be patrolled is very large and the resources with which patrolling can be done are limited. So as a result, we have to do strategic resource allocation and patrolling. And our work is concerned with the development of algorithmic solutions for this strategic resource allocation and patrolling. So we do this by modeling this entire domain as well as our problem as a green security game. And a green security game is a subclass of Stackelberg security games, which have been used widely to model strategic interactions between law enforcement agencies, otherwise called defenders, and their opponents, called adversaries. And green security games, being a subclass, model repeated interactions between these defenders and adversaries, where the defenders protect a finite set of targets, for example, wildlife or forest resources or fisheries, with limited patrolling and allocation resources. So we focus on real world scenarios and deployment in real world scenarios. And deployment in real world scenarios practically involves a combination of resource allocation and then patrolling once this allocation is done. Earlier approaches that have been used to solve green security games depend on mixed integer linear programming as well as linear programming. But the problem is that these approaches do not scale well to large and complex green security games like the one that we are dealing with. So reinforcement learning has been used recently for solving green security games. They ensure good performance and at the same time are very scalable also. So this is one reason why we looked at solving this problem using reinforcement learning algorithms. So till date, reinforcement learning has been used either for resource allocation or for patrolling in green security games, but not for both. So a real world deployment, as I said earlier, demands resource allocation as well as patrolling, and a solution strategy for doing this in a unified manner. So the contributions of our work are: one, a game model that incorporates allocation and patrolling in a green security game, with communication between defender agents, real-time information, as well as uncertainty in that real-time information. And the problem is that such a game model leads to an acutely deep game tree and is difficult to solve. We propose a novel solution strategy called Combined Security Game Policy Optimization for solving this game model by splitting it into two stages and then solving for each of them in a way that one complements the other. Comb SGPO, which is our algorithm, combines aspects of multi-agent reinforcement learning, action representation learning, as well as competitive policy optimization. So describing a game model, we abstract our green security domain to the form of a grid world, where each cell in the grid represents an area to be protected, a small region, a hotspot to be protected, which also has a certain animal density or a resource density. So the higher the resource density, the more valuable that cell is. We have two types of agents, as I mentioned earlier, defenders as well as adversaries. So now out of this defender team, inside this defender team, there are drones, surveillance drones, as well as human patrollers or forest rangers. So rangers and adversaries can perform only movement actions, which is up, down, left, right, and stay still. While drones, apart from movement actions, can perform communication actions as well. A drone, so a drone is assumed to have a binary object detector on it. If a poacher or adversary is in the same cell as a drone, the object detector returns 1, otherwise it's 0. So if a drone detects an adversary, the drone can either signal the ranger that the adversary is nearby or in the same cell as the drone, or it can, if the ranger is too far, for example, it can flash lights on it and warn the adversary, which might cause the adversary to flee if the adversary sees these warnings from the drone. So our game model is in two stages, an allocation stage and a patrolling stage. So we model the allocation stage as a zero-sum game between the defender team and the adversary team. So first, the defender allocates its resources, and observing the mixed strategy of the defender, the adversary performs its allocation. Once the allocations are done, the patrolling stage is then rolled out from the allocation points. And this patrolling stage we model as a partially observable stochastic game. And in this game, which occurs sequentially, the adversaries move around attacking one target after the other, while the drones and the rangers move around communicating with each other and trying to apprehend this adversary. So the patrolling stage ends when the adversary flees or is caught, or we exceed a time limit, which we keep as 100 time steps. Apart from this, our game model also incorporates detection uncertainty on the side of the drone, which means that if the drone is in the same cell as an adversary, the drone might not be able to detect the adversary. So we do this to sort of simulate real world scenarios. For example, if there is a high tree cover in a certain region, the drone detections might not be that accurate. So yeah, so we model detection uncertainty as well as observation uncertainty on the side of the adversary, which means that if the adversary sees, if the adversary and the drone are in the same cell, and if the drone warns, the adversary might not see that warning and might not flee. For the allocation stage, we use a utility maximizing adversary controlled by a neural network. And for the patrolling stage, we use a heuristic strategy for this adversary, which is based on the knowledge of animal densities of all the cells in the grid, as well as the initial allocations of the defender agents. So basically, we assume the adversary to prefer cells that have high animal density, but at the same time, keep as much distance as possible from the defender agents. So this is a comp SGPO algorithm. What we do is, initially, we train for the patrolling strategy. We use double DQNs, one shared by all the drones and one shared by all the rangers. And for training these double DQNs, we sampled random allocations for the defenders and adversaries, and then roll out the episode from those random allocations till we converge to some sort of a general patrolling strategy. Once we converge to a general patrolling strategy, we then train for the allocation strategies. But the problem is that the action space for these allocation strategies is huge and discrete. So what we do is we use action representation learning and map actions to embeddings in such a way that similar actions correspond to similar embeddings. So we sort of generalize over the action space. And then we train neural networks, one for the defender and one for the adversary, to learn action embeddings and to learn allocation strategies in the space of action embeddings. Once each network chooses an action or allocation embedding, we map that back to the actual initial allocation. This is our algorithm workflow. So given the state information, which is the animal densities, the defender and adversary allocation policy networks choose allocation embeddings, which are mapped to initial allocations. From these initial allocations, the patrolling stage is then played out, where the defender agents are controlled by multi-agent double DQNs. These are our results. So on the left side, you can see a bunch of heat plots. So basically what we did is we sampled attacks over 100 episodes of adversaries. And then we plotted that on the grid world to see which regions of the grid world are attacked most by the adversaries. So figure A on the left side shows the animal density distribution. B, C, D, and E shows the heat maps of sampled attacks for complex GPU algorithm. C, which is vanilla policy gradient. D is octad FP, which is an approach based on fictitious play. And E is random allocations. So we see that with our algorithm, B, the adversary attacks a smaller region at that too a lower number of times. And we performed extensive experimentation with one adversary as well as two adversaries with random animal densities as well as spatially distributed animal densities, as you can see on the left side. And we saw that in all of our experiments with 15 by 15 grids as well as 10 by 10 grids, we saw that our algorithm outperformed conclusively the baselines that we've considered. We also timed the time taken for each algorithm to converge to this final optimal policy. And we saw that in both grid sizes, 10 by 10 as well as 15 by 15, CompSGPO outperformed octad FP as well as GARDS. GARDS, again, is a mixed integer linear programming based approach. So overall, we saw that our algorithm qualitatively produces better results, quantitatively outperforms in terms of performance, as well as is faster and more scalable. We also analyzed the policies learned by CompSGPO, and we saw that a lot of interesting strategic behavior was observed. So COMB-CPO firstly learns to deploy agents in groups strategically based on their animal densities. For example, you can see a sampled episode here. At time t equals 0 shows the initial allocation. You can see that the drones, which are blue triangles, and the rangers, which are green pentagons, are deployed in a web-like manner around the adversary, which is the red dot. And so the drone changing from blue to gray here is the drone warning. So you can see that the adversary is kind of cornered, and all it can do is go up, and the drones are waiting for it. We also saw in cases where the ranger was too far away from the adversary to apprehend the adversary, and the drone was closer to the adversary. We saw that instead of the drone calling the ranger to come apprehend it, the drone directly went towards the adversary, started warning, which made the adversary flee, which was like strategically a better response, a better communications response. We also saw that in cases when there were two adversaries, the defender agents split themselves into two sub-teams. One sub-team, which consisted of all the rangers, went after one adversary and caught it, while the other sub-team, consisting of the drones, went after the other adversary and warned it and made it flee. Now, in certain cases where the drones moved around for a long time and still did not see an adversary, we saw that the drones went into a state of constant signaling to the forest rangers. We interpreted this as something like the drones communicating in some way to the rangers that there are no adversaries nearby the drones, meaning that the adversaries could be near the forest rangers instead. So as future work, we plan to replace the binary object detectors present on the drones with real-time image input from object detectors on drone cameras. So there is actually an object detection system called Spot that is running and has been deployed in the real world, which works in a national park in South Africa. So basically, a drone goes around, collects image input, and detects poachers as well as animals from its image input. And all this output from the drone's object detector will have to be analyzed by a human in the loop. So we are trying to automate that basically. And as a next step, we plan to run 3D simulations on Microsoft AirSim with this with the actual object detector, and also a patch for Microsoft AirSim called AirSim Africa, which has these adversaries, animals as well as rangers. So we hope that our work is a step forward in deploying such multi-agent systems in the real world for protection of green security domains. Thank you for attending this talk.
So are there any questions from the panelists?
I have a question. Aravind, great talk.
Thank you, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was just trying to understand when you said utility maximizing adversary, are you also assuming that the adversary is also trying to learn from behavior of the drones and other things?
So that is the allocation stage. And we actually model that as a zero-sum game.
Mm-hmm.
And in both cases, so what happens is, so once the allocation happens, we roll out an episode like a patrolling game, right? And the cumulative reward of all the defender agents from that patrolling game is taken as the payoff for choosing an allocation, which is like the payoff for choosing an allocation for this allocation network. And since it's a zero-sum game, the negative of the cumulative payoff for the defender is that of the attacker. And
so the attacker, so you're assuming that the attacker then knows all the information about, for instance, the number of drones, number of rangers, and everything. Is that
no, the attacker neural network basically has, during its optimization, has access to the policy parameters of the defender allocation neural network. And during the patrolling stage, it can only see all the animal densities of the grid, as well as only the initial allocations of the defender agent. So it does not have complete information. it has access to the mixed strategy of the defender in the allocation stage, and only part of that mixed strategy, like the pure strategy that is sampled from that mixed strategy in the patrolling stage.
Okay, okay, thanks. Maybe I'll talk to you later to get more details. Thanks, sir.
Okay.
So thanks, Aravind, for the talk. There are also some very interesting questions from the attendees in the Q&A box. It would be great if you can key the answers to those questions as well.
Shall I go them one by one right now?
Yeah, you can key in the answers. Type it.
Okay, yeah.
You can type it offline. I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah. Thanks again, Aravind.